Hello, Max here, and today, viewer, I wanted to share some of my artwork I've been doing lately. Skip to the page. This isn't the right one, or I could start here actually, that's fine. So, this is a representation of sadness. And this would be sort of anxiety, pain, and sadness. So fear and sadness, a form of that combined. And this is sort of what my sadness used to appear as, a very destructive form of it. Very destructive. She was not a force of it to be taken lightly. And eventually, she was driven into a state of pain where she couldn't keep lying, and so had to die in order to be reborn and free. And so she became Marx, or another form of sadness. This is a more current form. He is in a state of rebirth. He is undead, an undead fairy, and he's perhaps someday will be alive. I see it more as the old sadness was already dead, was sort of born in a state that wasn't workable for them in their surroundings, and is now in the process of becoming something constructive and not self-destructive. He has a little mustache. I often depict happiness with a mustache. These are all, I suppose, symbolically pieces of myself, but characterized, personified, because personification is a very human thing to do, and it helps me process my emotions in ways that are much more difficult without personification. I also put some of my special interests with this depiction of sadness, entomology, and character, a love of characters, a love of entomology, a love of invertebrates, and arthropods. Some of that is listed because I do recognize some of that in myself now as stemming from wanting to understand my surroundings, wanting to convey emotion. And for me, character design was one of my first, and entomology was one of my first real, I would say, like, hyper fixations that has driven a lot of my work. Oh, yep, so this one. This is a fairly more recent incarnation of fear. They are actually changed since this version. This would have been how it appeared, not literally. Most of what I say does not make sense literally. Don't take it literally, or it's not going to be understandable. I work in symbolism and metaphor, despite being autistic and taking things very, perhaps simplistically at times. So, in my teen years, up until probably around 2021, when I hit a breaking point in my life and needed to stop lying to myself, and I had reached a point where it became necessary to reinvent myself, because the me that I was killing me, and was in a lot of ways a lie and a mask contingent on control in my opinion. Um, Either by externally factors or internal, a combination. This fear, I also call her Queen Onyx, is somewhat inspired by the character GLaDOS from Portal, but also inspired by shadow people and other things, and I do feel that they would be a shadow person to some extent. They were a very destructive incarnation of fear that, at my height of self-denial, I would say was probably very much tied in with my dysphoria and other aspects of pain and fear. I don't see fear as a villain. I think they took destructive forms. I think they took very unhealthy means because they were trying to survive and they were trying to make sense of a world that they couldn't fit into and was driven into a very extreme, very destructive force. This would have been earlier in my life when I was a small child. I had an imaginary friend named Scared, who later I actually included as a character in a story I'd been working on for a while. And as I am autistic, I feel things very, very intensely. And I process things differently than many people do. There are parts of my brain that develop at different rates. And my experiences are not in line with those who are not autistic. One of my first imaginary friends as a kid, I named him Scared, and I believe he was a way for me to try and process the immense amount of fear I had as a child that I could not cope with or understand. And he wasn't destructive, the first form of fear that I guess personified, as humans do, was not destructive. He was actually very cuddly. He was like a big gorilla guy with a tennis racket for a face, or perhaps a fencer's mask. But he was a protector. He was an agent of protection, but not in a destructive way like Queen Onyx. Very much in a helpful way, actually. He was very kind, very gentle, but very scared. Very, very scared, which is why he was named Scared. And this character eventually left. I stopped having this friend around probably first grade or so. And they did eventually become destructive. My fear became a lot more destructive, especially as I was when I stopped seeing it as separate. I stopped being able to make sense of my emotions as a child. And I guess the first big thing, first really destructive force of fear would be represented this way. When I had panic attacks as a child, I would often see a wolf. And I think it was sort of symbolically perhaps representative of a fear of being, I guess, eaten or destroyed. And I think it's a pretty workable analogy, as violence and other forms of assault are, I would say, mentally quite tied. And then this would be a form of panic, a form of anxiety and fear as well. When I had panic attacks, I would often feel my throat constricted, my chest would tighten, and my stomach, everything would tighten, and I'd go very, very numb, where I wouldn't really be processing or feeling any emotions. and it felt like being tied and bound by a parasite. And so that's what this is supposed to visually represent, would be a parasite. The final form of fear, there's many faces of fear. This one is actually, despite appearance, a constructive form. And this one's inspired by G-Man from Half-Life 2, or the Man in Black stereotype, and Shadow People. I love the character G-Man from Half-Life 2. He's one of my favorite characters from a villain design perspective of all time, especially as I've gotten older and more confident in my manhood. I would say that he's been a very transitional character for me, exploring fear, exploring themes of pain. And so I've incorporated that character, who is involved with one of my special interests, which the Half-Life games, Half-Life 1, Half-Life 2, Portal 1, Portal 2 specifically, are games that I am deeply obsessed with and do a tremendous amount of work and art related to my obsessions with those games. And G-Man, I have incorporated with Queen Onyx, and now he's gone that fear has been changed. They are not destructive. They have gone from red, a very passionate, very angry, to a very sensitive blue. And now they are a constructive force in my life, where I'm not letting my fears control me. I am facing them. I am slowly, in my own way, however you want to take that, learning to confront fear and learning to not avoid it in the same way. I'm still very much, and I would say, in a transitional period of healing in my life, in my existence right now, where there are some fears I'm ready to face, I'm ready to conquer, that I am in the midst of, through my art, through my writing, processing and letting go of pain, letting go of trauma, letting go of the influx and overflow of bursting passion and emotions within me. And G-Man, as he's a character I really like because he terrifies me, I've used as sort of a combination of different symbolism and different things to represent my own fear. And so it's sort of inspired by that, and combining different things, different elements. I very much appreciate that character because they are a terrifying character. They're a very fitting character for fear. I do also have a crush on that character, I won't deny that. Done a lot of work around GLaDOS and G-Man, especially as I grow into myself, so to speak. Let me see, there was another one I had done. Oh, yes, this one. So often, as a coping mechanism growing up, I would separate my emotions from myself, where I did not see them, I did not acknowledge them. They were separate from me, and I was very numbed, I was very gray, I was very dulled, the complete opposite of this, where I was living as a mask. I was living as someone I didn't want to be, but felt it was impossible not to be. And so the result is that now I'm starting to slowly slowly listen and acknowledge my emotions as a piece of myself, not as separate, and I'm not forcing myself to be someone I'm not. I'm allowing myself to display autistic traits. I'm allowing myself to display, I would say, I guess, gender diverse traits. I don't know what that means, but I'm allowing myself to exist as I do in my heart, without forcing myself now to live as the mask that I don't want to be, that I never really wanted to be, but had forced myself to be, and because I had found from an early age that when I displayed traits that did not fit that mask, because people wanted to see that it was not really a doable thing for me until recently. And now I respect my own boundaries far more, and am starting to exist with all my emotions, with all the colors of my rainbow. And I would say that as an autistic guy, there are a lot of things I experience very intensely, very vibrantly, that this piece to me represents. It is in a lot of ways the opposite of a piece I did maybe a year ago or so, where I had been, it was one of the last pieces I did as my dead name, which I won't say here because I don't wish to remember that life at this time. Well, you can't avoid your struggles. You have to process it at some point, but I'm not at a place where I really want to be speaking too heavily about my dead self. But I will say that if that person was someone where everything was external, one of the last pieces I did as my dead self, and I actually titled that piece with my dead name, like that was the name of that piece, it was kind of like this, except all my emotions, all the vibrancy, everything was external, was outside, because I wasn't processing a lot of things. What I was processing was mostly just the beginnings of immense pain because of how much I had been bottling things up. And now I'm starting to be this, where I'm starting to allow myself to feel all the good and bad emotions and not bottle things up. And so this is how I feel. This is how I see myself in my heart, in my soul, I guess. All my emotions combined in one entity, not separated. And this would be anger and passion. I see them as deeply intertwined. I think passion can become anger, and anger can become passion. This character is inspired by a few different things. When I was very young, I used to often, either in dreams or in art, see these red eyes. They kind of looked like this, sort of this fantasy type thing. And around my teen years, I started making fire elemental drawings. There was this character who I named the race a Charscorchian, which they're tree people, but they're burnt. They're burning tree people with coal hair and fire hair and ink for blood. And I've made a Charscorchian to represent my anger, my passion. So that's this character. And this is also a piece of myself. Again, much of what I say doesn't really make sense literally. It's very much about the emotion. It's very much about the character design and me trying to process my current state of existence, my current place in the world, in a way that will make sense to me. And characters make sense to me because I've spent my life studying and creating and learning about people. At first, it was a very destructive thing. I was masking, trying to fit in among them in a destructive way. And now it's in a constructive way where I'm using my art as a filter and a means to understanding myself, not with judgment, not with grief and hatred and guilt, as I felt when I lived among others, unlike myself, but with curiosity, kindness, acceptance, and forgiveness. So this is also a protector. Fear and anger and sadness were not always destructive, and now they're becoming less destructive, more and more every day. My emotions are, as I'm not avoiding them, as I'm not tuning everything out and dulling myself now, I do find that I'm not having as many panic attacks. I'm not having as many outbursts of pain, of lashing out pain. I'm finding that things are much better, much, much better. And anger was supposed to be a force in my life to teach me when my boundaries are being crossed. But because my boundaries were constantly being crossed and I lacked the tools and the means to protect myself, anger became a very destructive force where I was locking them up with help from my fear and different things. I actually have an idea for a story of how to like symbolically represent all of these different things. And I have written a bit about all this processing. But for me, anger was initially not really, like, it was very intense. My anger's always been a very, I would say, very dramatic, very intense thing. But it became destructive in my life because it was trying to survive. It was trying to protect me. And I wasn't letting it because I couldn't respect my boundaries. And whenever I tried, it emotionally was not safe. And so I would bottle it up and then it would come out much worse, of course, because when you ignore your emotions, they either attack you or they attack those around you because they're trying to survive too in their own way, because a human can't exist without their emotions, I think. I used to want to. I wanted to be a robot for a very long time. But I don't think I would be me if I wasn't with my emotions. In some way. I don't think I would be me if I wasn't autistic as well. But I did grow up believing I was a monster, and now I don't. Now I see that I just exist in a different way.